In my next agenda, I'm going to invite a panel of sustainable tech leaders to the stage. First of all, can I invite Ms. Joanna Newman to come along the stage as the Senior Director of Technology Partnership from Vodafone. Next, can I please invite Ms. Angela Baker, the Chief Sustainable Officer from Qualcomm. And further, Ms. Pallavi Mahajan, who is the Vice President of Network and Edge Software from Intel. And lastly, Mr. Freddie Södergren from Ericsson. Welcome. You guys will give my panelists a big hand. Thank you. Now, guys, as an industry now today, ITU is suggesting that our industry needs to reduce carbon emission by 45%. This needs to be achieved by 2050. I would love to hear from the panelists what is the different technology leaders in the world doing something about it. Perhaps I'll start with Angela from Qualcomm.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So Angela, can you share with us how is Qualcomm developing its net zero carbon strategy?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's going to sound very similar to Justine's actually. So I don't want, without being too repetitive, maybe we'll just give sort of a high level. But at Qualcomm, we also have a 2040 net zero target across all three scopes, science-based target aligned. And we are also starting within our own operations, right? Looking at decommissioning cogen plants that we might have on campus. We only have a few, but getting rid of those. Doing large-scale PPAs in our top operational footprints, right? Europe, Asia. Obviously, it's easier in some places than others to procure renewable energy, but really looking at how we can leverage and procure more renewable energy. And then, Qualcomm is primarily fabless. We do have 3 fabs, which came through an acquisition of RF360, but looking at some process emissions changes within those fabs about what we could do in terms of abatement to reduce that footprint. So we're really focused on Scope 1 and Scope 2 right now, as well as working with our supply chain, primarily our top 9, which is over 90% of our spend, in terms of our top, our manufacturing suppliers. And having conversations with them. Many of our suppliers also have net zero targets. They might be 2040, they might be 2050. So everyone's working towards these goals. It's just a matter of who's working a little bit more quickly or how we can work together on some of these programs. That's sort of the first bucket. I would say the second bucket is power efficiency, building power efficient chips. We have a public goal around reducing the power usage by 10% year over year. Actually, our annual corporate responsibility report is publishing today, hot off the press if you want to read it, but we've actually reduced by 20% in our Snapdragon mobile platform products this year. So double, increase the output, but reduce the power usage. And then the third bucket is probably what you've heard a lot about if you walk in anybody's booth, which is this digital transformation piece, right? And how can 5G, 6G, how can these technologies be leveraged? You heard from our colleague at Huawei, he gave a lot of use cases and examples as well, but what does that mean in terms of water optimization, reducing greenhouse gases? I think that the number that they've said in the US is that it could reduce by 20% if you have a full proliferation of 5G, right? So, but what does that actually mean? Getting 5G on the smart energy grids so they're more responsive to data needs and they're running more efficiently, or large-scale agriculture farms, which we just heard from Justine, whether it's drone or AI machine learning, or some projects that we have around wind turbines and drones to make sure that they're operating as efficiently as possible, right? So I think helping to build out those use cases, that's a huge area of focus for Qualcomm and working across our entire value chain with a number of customers and partners, probably for many folks on the stage as well, to develop those use cases in order to help deploy 5G even more quickly.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to direct the next question to Ms. Pallavi from Intel. What do you see is the most crucial building block in achieving the net zero carbon strategy by 2050 for Intel?
It has to be technology, technology, and technology. We have to use technology as a force for good to drive sustainable outcomes across our industry. Now, whether you call it hardware advancements, whether you call it software, whether you call it, the power of artificial intelligence, and more importantly, we have to get the power of collective. I was so happy to hear Justine talk about it. We have a lot of examples where operators like Vodafone, they're using artificial intelligence to dynamically watch traffic patterns and basis of that, go about and adjust their energy requirements. We have examples of, every time you do a hardware upgrade or you go about and do a software upgrade, that brings in more energy efficiency, and that's all good. I think anything that we can do that brings down the energy requirement, anything that we can do that reduces the carbon footprint, that's the need of the hour. I mean, especially, we guys are here in Europe. The families here in Europe have been struggling with soaring energy bill. Closer home in the UK, I know of families that struggle to get basic amenity like heating. And, if all across the US, the cell site power consumption could be reduced by 40%,
Yep.
that is enough electricity to light up a country like Bhutan or a country like Luxembourg.
Wow.
That's the quantum of impact that we can actually go about and do. And to me, we all, technology vendors, operators, service providers, government, NGOs, industry leaders, we all need to come together in order to go about and solve this problem, which is the power of collective that we are talking about.
Great. So we've heard the innovations around the software, the hardware, and the cloudification.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to point to Freddie to talk about networks. Right. With 75% of carbon emission coming from the RAN, or radio access network, of a mobile network, how is Ericsson addressing this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's really a challenge of reducing the energy consumption in the network, meeting the net zero targets, while at the same time catering for the growth in data and also the increasing expectation from users in terms of performance, reliability, and speed. And I think if you look historically, we haven't been very good at solving this. Every new generation we have introduced, we have added more equipment, we have increased the energy consumption, and we have really just added on top, layers on top. But luckily, 5G is by far the most energy efficient technology we have. It's actually 13 times, up to 13 times more energy efficient compared to a 4G equivalent site. So in my mind, what we should be talking about is how do we scale 5G where it's really needed in a sustainable way. And we at Ericsson, we look at this in 3 buckets. So first of all, we need to look at network planning and network design in a more holistic way. So we need to think about how do we correlate user experience with speed and with the capacity in the networks to really make sure that we create the optimal balance and only build more capacity where it's actually needed. Secondly, we have to modernize the networks. As I mentioned before, 5G is inherently more efficient. So we need to accelerate the transition from 4G to 5G, and while doing that, get rid of the legacy equipment that is significantly more power hungry than the latest equipment. And then thirdly, we need to operate the networks in a more intelligent way. We need to look at the latest AI, machine learning, automation tools that are out there, and then apply that to how we turn on and off the network, how we allocate capacity where it's actually needed, and so forth. And I think if we do all of these 3 things in concert as one industry, I'm quite optimistic that we will be able to meet the very high ambitious targets we have, while at the same time increasing the user satisfaction and the capacity in the networks. So that's the challenge, and I'm really optimistic on it.
Wow. So you can hear all the innovations from Qualcomm, from Ericsson, and from Intel. Let's point to Joanna and ask, how is Vodafone leveraging a lot of this technology innovation and especially how Vodafone is applying the innovation in your daily operation, network operations and practice?
Yes, no, that's a great question as well. And there's lots of innovation coming from our vendors and from our suppliers. There's lots of support from government and regulators to actually be able to close down some of that legacy equipment, which in some cases we're bound to keep open until they decide that we can, etc. What we're really seeing are lots of opportunities to act across 4 buckets. So you had 3, I have 4. I'm sorry, I'm last. So 4 buckets. So the first is to purchase power responsibly. The second is to generate it responsibly and use renewable energy where possible. And we're already doing that across the majority of our European footprint. It's important to remember that Vodafone is the 2nd largest mobile company in the world. We operate in 22 markets. We've got joint ventures in another 6 or 7. We've got Vodacom in Africa. We operate across another 60 markets with our various partners. So what we try to do is to act not only as Vodafone, but also Vodafone, Vodacom, our partner markets as well. So that's for power generation and responsible purchasing. We also focus on reducing consumption in the network. So as Freddie said, to take some of that customer experience data and use it to what I like to call right size or optimize the resources that are associated with it. To following up on what Angela said, to work with governments to allow us to actually have sensible regulations so that we can decommission things that we need to. And you're speaking about factories, I'm speaking more about sites, etc. And then our 4th element is to follow sustainable purchasing decisions. So not necessarily scope 3 as described by the others, but to ensure that we're weighting appropriately in our RFPs and RFQs for our own network and all of the networks that we influence around the world, that we're really giving the right weighting towards carbon responsible solutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. Now, I'm just going to direct this to Pallavi and ask, how can software innovation accelerate the overall carbon reduction? Seemingly now we have a decentralized network, especially with the innovation of Cloud RAN, Open RAN, and so forth.
Yeah.
How do you see software playing a crucial role in this?
Yeah, I was talking about innovation, and what is that one thing that gets you innovate faster? It is software, right? Whether you're talking of agility, whether you're talking of innovation. So there is a lot of thrust, and we are seeing across the industry a lot of stuff now move over to software just because of the speed of innovation. And when you look at software, there are multiple ways of looking at it. We at Intel, we call that our mission is to liberate the world from fixed form factor devices to now software that runs on general purpose compute. And this is a long-term secular shift of more and more software running on general purpose compute from the cloud to the edge. We've already seen the software-defined transformation happen in the networks. We are now seeing in the RAN side of things.
Sure.
The RAN is getting virtualized. And the RAN is the most complex, and also 75% of the energy consumption in the whole deployment is with the RAN. And it's not just this space, but even in the edge, when you look at it, more and more workloads are getting consolidated. They're becoming more cloud native. And a lot of stuff is moving over to software. So, I'm talking about these transformations, but how does it help us from a sustainability point of view? So let's look at energy efficiency. So when you are moving everything over to software, for you to bring in efficient software, it's as good as just an upgrade of the OS on your phone. You don't have to wait for a hardware refresh. So you get efficiency faster. Networks, as networks are getting designed more and more into cloud native, that just provides the opportunity to operators to go about and dynamically reconfigure, deploy services based on changing customer patterns, choices. All of that goes about and brings in a lot of energy efficiency. And every conversation has to have artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence. When you bring in fine-grained telemetry, real-time monitoring, and then you bring in artificial intelligence, it brings you so much capability to go about and bring power efficiency. That's one side of the coin, but we are also talking about how do we reduce the carbon footprint. When you don't need to have a hardware refresh for every feature. You can get it through software. That helps you. When instead of having 20 different devices in your edge, if you can consolidate all of that onto one hardware, that's carbon footprint reduction. So a lot of these use cases. But at Intel, we are also very focused. I keep on talking about this power of collective because we have to democratize our technology in terms of making it open source, in terms of making it highly programmable. So I was hearing Justine talk about some of the examples. I'll share a couple of the examples that, some solutions that Intel has worked with. It's with an ISV called Presidace. What they do is they do just-in-time inventory for fast food retail chain. And you will think, why is she talking about it from a sustainability point of view? It is because it is reducing so much of food wastage.
Yes.
Now with artificial intelligence, you can actually go about and with 99% of accuracy, you can detect any crop diseases. So you go about and reduce chemicals, you bring more crop yield and all of that stuff. So it's all about bringing in, software makes it more open, more easy for people to go about and bring innovation.
Thank you. We've heard lots about cloudification of the network specifically. I'm going to direct back to Joanna on the recent study on Open RAN that Vodafone has done. Joanna, can you elaborate a little bit about the study, and especially with the cloudification of network, with all the software is involved, the cloud technology and the network? I think it's just a right converge point to understand the impact of the study.
Absolutely, and I'd invite everybody to come and see our stand in Hall 3 and see the great work that we're doing with Open RAN, with Intel, we're doing it with Qualcomm, we've got activities with Ericsson as well, and to come and see how we're really bringing this to life. I describe some of this as where the rubber meets the road. We've got some great some great commitments, we've got passion, we've got a collective industry moving forward, and we've got some economic environments that are really supporting us in making this transformation much faster. So if you come into the Vodafone booth, you'll see a few demonstrations of Open RAN, which demonstrate more than 15% power savings on the compute. Now that's using the current generation of the Intel chips. I'm told that it's going to be much more when we hit Sapphire Rapids next year, right? You'll see a demonstration where we're looking at Qualcomm GPUs and how that's being consolidated on a chip so that you don't need to have that additional hardware there. You can control that in software and make that much more programmable and cut down the release cycles and the time to release because it's not hardware any longer. You'll see savings that are coming from what we expect to see in massive MIMO when we move from from programmable FPGAs to ASIC and soft ASIC, where we can upgrade in massive MIMO. So come and see all of those savings, and collectively, it is going to be more than 9 to 14% is what we expect. Now, a qualifier for that. This is a proof of concept or a pilot. We have to get all the way to production to maintain those numbers, but they're really promising. And lastly, you'll see our network in a box, which is a femtocell that can sit in your home or in a small business or in the deep caverns of a conference center, which helps bring 5G to those locations as well, that operates at 12 watts is what they said when it's not being fully utilized. So we're really taking advantage of all of the innovation that's happening. And I'd love to say that this is solely Vodafone, but it's not. It's Vodafone, it's the O-RAN Alliance, it's the Linux Foundation, it's open source capabilities, the Telecom Infra Project, etc. So we really are driving for a collective solution to these problems to reduce energy in the RAN. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. So there is a constant theme across all the panelists here today on data, on customer experience benchmarking, energy efficiency benchmarking, and how do you turn data to apply in the future greener networks. I'm going to direct to Freddie to ask Freddie, how is Ericsson leveraging data to actually drive this greener future networks?
Yeah. So first of all, we leverage AI and machine learning and data across our entire portfolio. And of course, there's a lot of innovation happening all the way from the way we utilize the underlying hardware all the way up to how we manage the full network. So it really sits across. If we look at going back to how we operate networks more intelligently, I think there is a lot more we can do, and we are right now we have launched 200 AI-powered apps that we are now working with customers to implement, which is trying to, what you said, optimize the customer experience and the energy usage more in the correlation. And what we have been able to do when applying these different applications is build a predictable traffic model that looks at historical data, it looks at real-time data, and it tries to predict not only the capacity in the network, but the actual user experience using the network. And by looking at that, we can then dimension the different capacity, how it's allocated in the network. We can turn on and off not only base stations, but individual carriers, individual bands. And then we can also do this in a way that has zero impact on the user experience. And we actually deployed this full breadth of apps at a customer in Asia recently. And we managed to get the total energy consumption down by 25% when deploying this. So that's really, really impactful. And that was done without the users noticing. It's only about turning on the on and off these features, these apps, based on the actual traffic.
Well, thank you, Freddie. So what I've been hearing from the panel today, it seems like we have three major themes happening in terms of how we as industry leaders can actually act and do more for this cause. Number one, there's a whole ESG clarity in ESG planning and strategy. Number two, there is a whole ecosystem partnership at play, which what Pallavi and Fred has actually mentioned. And number three, there is a whole bunch of Scope 3 partnership, supply management, and education, which Angela's mentioned about it. And number four, it's about leveraging data and insights as the new management tool for ESG to drive more and accelerate the industry more. That's what I've been hearing. Perhaps this is an open question, but let's start with Angela. What can we do with our suppliers? What else more can we do with our suppliers today that you've seen that you've done with Qualcomm?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to get, and you just talked about data, but is to get your hands around the data. And I think Scope 3 continues to be challenging. It continues to be challenging, right? You can't reduce your footprint until you know what your footprint is, right? So I think we've been publishing our Scope 3 for a number of years. I think probably everybody on the stage has been, but we continue to refine it, right? And I think that can provide or present challenges when you're trying to reduce it. A lot of it right now is also based on spend, right? And so it's not an accurate portrayal of what your data is. So working with your suppliers to get that actual real, I think, we're saying real-time data, so it's more accurate. And what is the actual footprint? And it's hard when your suppliers also supply to a number of people, right? So I think the first step is to get the most accurate data that you can, working with your suppliers on strategies that you may have implemented within your own Scope 1, Scope 2 reduction. So maybe helping them to procure renewable or work, do cost sharing or things like that if that's a possibility. Obviously, it's very expensive, especially if your supply chain is predominantly in Asia, right, in places like Singapore and stuff where the cost of energy is very, very expensive. And then helping them look at strategies that they can also reduce their footprint. So if it's not just about procuring renewable energy, but also looking at their Scope 1, what changes can they make within their buildings or within their factories or places like that. So I would say we're still pretty early in our journey. I don't want to oversell, I think, but we do have a commitment. We have interim targets by 2030 and by 2040 to be net zero. So it's definitely a huge focus for us. And check back with me in 2 years. Maybe I'll have even more strategies to focus on.
I will then divert to Pallavi. In terms of, you mentioned early on about building an ecosystem, a partnership. And I think especially coming from software, you're like the glue for the hardware, the networks and the chipsets, and also the data that's actually. How do you see we can do better in terms of bringing a tighter ecosystem partners together?
Yeah, you heard me talk about technology. I think the key is making technology simple and easy to use so that then you can bring in innovation at the mass level. And which is where, everything that we do, it has to be standard based. We were talking about the O-RAN Alliance. There's going to be a lot of innovation in the RAN space, but if everyone is doing it very differently versus standard-driven innovation, has to be standard-based, has to be open, has to be programmable. And one of the things that Intel does is we have a network builder function where we make it easy for people to come in, access our technology. A lot of that is open source. So, playgrounds where you can come in and test the AI algorithm that will give you the best crop yield. How do you make technology easy, accessible, and available to the masses? That's our focus at Intel.
Great. And Freddie, how do you think that we can use AI better in terms of collecting the data from the network, from the software, from the customer experience that we just talked about earlier?
So I think it goes back to the collaboration topic again. Right? I think we could do better at collecting the data in a standardized way, sharing that in the broader supply chain, and then understanding, how do we, all the way from the service provider that has the access to the end user and the end user data, how do we get that all the way up to and draw learnings from that, all the way up the supply chain, all the way down to how we design the hardware, the chips, the radios. I think there's a lot more we can do in that end-to-end transparency. Of course, within the guidelines of GDPR or kind of protecting the end user data. So I think we have been a little bit cautious. We have been a little bit on the, let's say, safe side when it comes to sharing data. But I think that's changing now. So I would say that's number one. Number two, which is more on the algorithm side, on the AI side. I think there again we have focused a lot on open standards, open technology, open source. We haven't focused so much on how do we scale algorithms, how do we improve jointly the AI learning. We shouldn't be forced to provide learning for the AI multiple times. That should be something that we share across the industry. So I think there's a lot more to do there on the collaboration side.
So, yeah, to that point, we in Accenture are trying to bring and work together with the CSPs and the tech partners yourself to be able to learn and share lessons learned on the green network and whether they benchmark and the KPIs itself, working closely. And I think probably to Joanna's point earlier on the Open RAN experience, I think it's a pilot, but once it scales up, that we will be able to scale and actually learn more. And from the lessons learned in the industry, we can share and actually apply to our operations and our practice. So with that due course, I would like to thank the panel for sharing a very insightful session. And please welcome and thank them.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
For having us.
Thank you very much.